KPBS On Demand is supported by Splatero, helping homeowners pay off debt by offering streamlined access to your home's equity with no additional monthly payments or new debt. Splatero provides a lump sum payment in exchange for a share of your home's future value. Pre-qualification is available at splatero.com.
Welcome to KPBS Roundtable. I'm Matt Hoffman. The San Diego City Council passes new tenant protections meant for San Diego renters.
This ordinance is really just protecting tenants who have followed all the rules.
We'll hear why some landlords are not happy about this and why some renters say it doesn't go far enough. We're also discussing the city's efforts to help keep more people out of homelessness. This one's through new affordable housing efforts, which could soon include buying more hotels.
The idea is that this is a way of creating affordable housing. Though people who are now homeless could move into these buildings, then this would be their home forever.
Don't go anywhere. Roundtable is coming up next.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Splatero, helping homeowners pay off debt by offering streamlined access to your home's equity with no additional monthly payments or new debt. Splatero provides a lump sum payment in exchange for a share of your home's future value. Pre-qualification is available at splatero.com.
This week, in an 8-1 vote, the San Diego City Council passed the Tenants Protection Ordinance. It's meant to help prevent San Diegans from falling into homelessness, but many landlords say this will only make San Diego's housing situation even worse. A final vote on the measure is set for next month. The move is the most recent in a number of city efforts to tackle the local housing crisis through new affordable housing projects and even through buying hotels. Here to help us navigate what's been happening are Andrew Bowen, the Metro reporter here with KPBS News, and Gary Worth is back with us. He covers homelessness and much more with the San Diego Union Tribune. I want to welcome you both here to Roundtable. Andrew, let's start with you. So the San Diego City Council, they took up this renter protections issue late into the night on Tuesday. It did end up passing in a near unanimous vote. Generally, what is this measure? How does it protect renters?
Well, basically, it makes it harder for a landlord to evict a tenant when the tenant has followed the terms of their lease and has paid the rent on time. It also shortens the amount of time that these protections take place, or rather when they come into effect. So as soon as a tenant moves into a unit, these tenant protections are in effect and they are, covered by them. Whereas the previous law that the city had on the books with tenant protections, there was a sort of a lag time. So, for the first year or two, you wouldn't necessarily be covered by it. An example of how it would help out a tenant would be if the landlord wants to evict a tenant to substantially remodel the unit. The landlord has to have their stricter notification requirements, so they have to notify the tenant of their rights. They also have to have a building permit for the renovations in hand before they can evict the tenant. So that would prevent someone from just saying, oh, well, I'm going to renovate this home, so you need to leave, but then never actually follow through on the renovation. I think probably one of the bigger financial hits that landlords could end up taking is if they do follow through with an eviction to remodel the unit or any other kind of eviction where the tenant hasn't done anything wrong, the tenant is entitled to 2 months' rent for relocation assistance. So the landlord just has to pay them cash money to help them find a new place to live. And for seniors or people with disabilities, that moves up to 3 months. So quite a bit more help that tenants will get when they are forced out of their homes when they haven't done anything wrong or haven't been found to do anything wrong. Another thing I'll also note is that if this eviction ends up in court and the tenant is fighting back, they're saying, the landlord didn't follow the rules, and that the decision is in their favor. If a landlord is found to have violated this ordinance, the landlord is liable to pay the attorney's fees for the tenants. And so that basically, the goal is to create a market for attorneys who are willing to represent tenants who have a strong case, but don't have the cash money to pay them up front for their legal representation. If the lawyer knows, well, you've got a rock-solid case, I'm going to represent you because I think that we can win this case, and that's how I'm going to get paid. That was another aspect of the ordinance.
Sounds like a lot of broad protections, but it also sounds like in some of your reporting that there are some exemptions. What are those exemptions?
Yeah, well, one example is when a landlord lives in a duplex and they live in one of the units and they rent out the second unit. There was actually a landlord who spoke at the meeting who described this very situation where he, lives in a duplex, rents out the second unit. He had to do a bunch of renovations and couldn't evict the tenant. In that scenario, nothing would change for him. This ordinance would not apply to that situation. So I think some of the landlords who were speaking at the meeting probably didn't read too closely into all of the details of this ordinance. That's not uncommon. Regular folks don't always get too deep into the weeds of these policy debates. But those exemptions were actually one of the reasons why a lot of tenants and tenant rights groups were not fully supportive of this ordinance. They wanted it to go even further, and they wanted to cut some of those exemptions out.
And we'll get into a little bit more of that later. A lot of this is surrounding adding new protections to these so-called no-fault evictions. And we know that that's something that can lead to homelessness. Let's bring in Gary Worth from the San Diego Union-Tribune. Gary, generally, how is San Diego's housing situation, kind of intertwined with homelessness?
Well, as far as evictions go, I think it's important to note that it's not a one-to-one equation. If one person gets evicted, that doesn't mean that there's one more homeless person. Though not everyone who gets evicted is going to become homeless. You'll probably have all kinds of safety nets, though. So I don't know how many people might become homeless in a city if they're evicted, but I can tell you it does happen. I have, especially during the pandemic, I met people who had been living somewhere and they lost their housing. Could have been a temporary thing. Like, that's the other thing. I think that, if somebody gets evicted, they may not become chronically homeless, but they may be temporarily homeless. They might have a job and actually might have to go on the street, live in their car, or even in a shelter until they can, find another place to live, find a roommate or something. But again, it does happen. There's a book that it often gets cited in this discussion called Homelessness is a Housing Problem. And these researchers found that when you look at the rate of homelessness per capita, though, not just the numbers of homelessness, what you find is that there are large cities that have a lower rate of homelessness, like Chicago and Cleveland. And there are large cities in the West, like San Diego and Los Angeles, that have a high rate of homelessness. And the difference is that in Cleveland and Chicago, cost of living is a lot less, and there's more housing, though, that people can afford.
Andrew, the idea behind this ordinance is to prevent homelessness. How exactly did the council say that would happen?
Well, certainly when people are evicted from their home and they don't have anywhere else to go, that is, the definition of homelessness, when you don't have somewhere to live. One thing that I think was really interesting that came up in the meeting is this ordinance is really just protecting tenants who have followed all the rules. They've paid their rent on time and they haven't broken the terms of their lease. A lot of times, the people who end up on the streets and fall into chronic homelessness are people who have been evicted because they didn't pay their rent, or because they have, perhaps have an addiction problem and are causing a nuisance or other kinds of problems. Maybe there's illegal activity going on in their unit, and those types of situations where someone does not have the support that they need to live a healthy life. Or maybe they just don't have the income and can't afford to pay the rent, and therefore they end up, getting evicted because of an at-fault eviction, or what's called a just cause eviction. That is a sliver of the homeless population that this ordinance doesn't actually cover.
And, during this meeting, there were some people that thought that this ordinance did not go far enough to protect renters. Here's some sound from Rafael Bautista. He's director of the San Diego Tenants Union, speaking during this week's city council meeting.
We would love to see the tenant protection ordinance carry out what it's intending to do, which is keep people from facing displacement. Unfortunately, the loopholes that have been carved into this policy are going to do the exact opposite. We're afraid that this is a scenario where there's a hurricane coming, we have limited resources, and y'all are bringing down the levee to allow landlords to come in, use these relocation, renovation incentives to trick tenants to leave, especially during the economic downturn.
Andrew, what do you think he and others meant by that were speaking at the meeting? And I'm sure when he says incentives there, he talks about the 2-month rent that people would be getting.
Yeah, well, the incentives are for the tenants, not for the landlords. I can't speak specifically to what he was, what the loopholes were that he was referring to. I did mention the exemption for, landlords who live in one unit of a duplex and rent out the other unit. I think that, there's a certain perspective from the tenants' rights space that landlords are always the ones who are greedy, or they're always looking to get rid of tenants for no good reason. And I'm sure that there are cases of, bad actors on both sides. That was one thing that struck me listening to the hearing. Every landlord who got up there said, well, my tenants love me and we're like family, and I give them, bottles of wine on Christmas. And tenants might get up and say, I've always followed the rules and I've never done anything wrong. And, you have to imagine that some of these folks are speaking sort of in absolutes because that's where they're coming from politically. But if you think that the end result of an ordinance like this is successful or good, if people on both sides of the issue are against it or are unhappy with it or think that it's not good enough, then I think that's what the council president ended up accomplishing. There were people who were unhappy on both sides.
Yeah, and there was a lot of public speakers. I mean, this meeting went on for hours into the night. I want to play some sound from Jordan Bean. He's with the San Diego Regional Task Force on Homelessness, and he spoke in favor of this ordinance.
We know our homeless response system is being overwhelmed by people becoming homeless for the first time. In fact, in March, we reached a sobering milestone. We have not had a single month in the last year where more San Diegans have become housed than experienced homelessness for the first time.
Gary, we touched on this just a little bit earlier, but does the regional task force, or do you have any idea of how much things like, rising rents or no-fault evictions might contribute to homelessness?
Well, not exactly. I don't think they've ever equated like some kind of formula that show, just how it's happened, or even how many people have become homeless because of rent. I'd like to know. But they're not looking into it at that granular of a level. They just give a number, and this is how many people became homeless, and that is based on how many people touch some kind of homeless service every month. And unfortunately, it's always more than the number of homeless people who get housed. However, a lot of the people who are included in that number of newly homeless people are folks who are going to be temporarily homeless. They may have lost a job and they may have moved into their car, and then they do become homeless for a while. And a lot of people who are housed, though the majority of the people who are housed find housing on their own. They're able to rent their own place, maybe move in with somebody, so they do find housing on their own. But again, it does happen at the end of the day that the number of people who have become homeless, it is always greater than the number of people who are housed. And whether or not they're going to be temporarily homeless, it's going to add up, and unfortunately, some people who become temporarily homeless can't get out of that temporary homelessness. And it's a slippery slope. It's very hard to become housed once you do lose everything and once you are homeless. And that's why there's more efforts to try to prevent people from falling into homelessness, because we know that it's really hard to overcome homelessness, get out of homelessness once you are in. So I don't know how many people do fall into homelessness because of their rent, but I bet it's happening a lot. In fact, just on Tuesday, I was talking with some people who were living in the new senior shelter that the city opened downtown. And one of the women I talked to was a retired nursing assistant, and her husband's retired military, and they raised their rent so much so that they got evicted, and now they're living in a shelter.
Yeah, and you definitely hear it from people that might be on fixed incomes. I imagine that's something that you hear quite a bit.
Yeah, that was absolutely the case in this couple. They were on a fixed income, and she said we simply could not afford to pay something like twice as much, if even more, than they were paying originally, that the rent had gone up that much. And they were trying to pay off some of it, but they said that their checks were being returned because they weren't paying the full amount, and they got truly evicted. And they're they were out on the street.
This is something I think a lot of folks in San Diego don't necessarily understand about the homeless crisis here. The most visible segment of the homeless population, or the segment that we notice the most, are folks with mental health challenges or addiction. And, they are not necessarily the majority of the people who are living on the streets. Even people who are living on the streets aren't necessarily the vast majority of people who are homeless. There's also people who are couch surfing or, again, like Gary mentioned, living in cars. But, there are folks who become homeless and develop mental health challenges or addictions as a result of that homelessness. They may not have had those challenges before. But imagine if you are, sleep deprived, if you're never getting a good night's sleep, it can be challenging to go to work one day and, finish that work day if you haven't had a good night's sleep. Well, imagine if that's something that you experience every night. It can be very easy for those of us who are securely housed to sort of point the finger and blame people for their addiction problems, when in reality, many of us, it's hard for us to judge because we've never experienced what it's like to actually live on the streets, and how substance use could give somebody a temporary escape, even if it is going to harm them in the long run.
We'd like to hear from you. What's your reaction to these new tenant protections that the City Council passed? Give us a call at 619-452-0228. You can leave us a voicemail there, or you can email us at roundtable@kpbs.org. When we return, our housing discussion continues.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Splatero, helping homeowners pay off debt by offering streamlined access to your home's equity with no additional monthly payments or new debt. Splatero provides a lump sum payment in exchange for a share of your home's future value. Pre-qualification is available at splatero.com.
You're listening to KPBS Roundtable. I'm Matt Hoffman. We're talking about some of San Diego's recent efforts on housing. Joining me is Andrew Bowen from KPBS News and the Union Tribune's Gary Worth. Andrew, this tenant protection measure, it's received a lot of pushback from landlords. I mean, they were probably the majority of people there, even though some people said that, how can those who are working come to an afternoon city council meeting? There were dozens who spoke out at this meeting, and some of these landlords said that these tenant protections are only going to make the housing situation worse, not better. Why do they say that?
Well, if they decide to ultimately take their units off the rental market, then that would deplete because they can't afford, they can't make a profit off of them if that's their business or their livelihood. Then, that would reduce the supply of housing overall and make it harder for someone to find a place to live. I think we also heard concerns from developers who felt like this would be a financial disincentive for them to even build new housing in the first place. I think San Diego has been much more ambitious than a lot of other cities in finding ways to build more housing, increase density in more walkable neighborhoods, and give give developers incentives to include more affordable housing in their projects by, giving them a break on a height limit or a density limit. It's hard for me to imagine that these tenant protections will have a significant impact on the number of homes that are being built. I think that there are lots of other issues at play there that are keeping our housing production numbers down, like property tax incentives to just leave a property in place and not redevelop it or not sell it. So I think the landlord perspective we heard certainly was there were a lot of, mom and pop landlords, as they call themselves, saying we don't have the resources of these larger corporate landlords to to give our tenants that relocation assistance, and it's going to just make it harder for regular folks who own properties to rent them out because it'll just make it harder for them to actually earn a living with that business.
And does this ordinance take into account, you mentioned mom and pop landlords, even though some of those mom and pop landlords sounded like they had quite a bit amount of property. Does the landlord take into account, like, we're going to, treat smaller business owners, you could say, different than maybe larger corporations?
Well, like I mentioned, if there's a duplex that is owner occupied, that you could consider that person a mom and pop landlord, and they are exempt from this. But as far as assessing the size of a company, how many properties an individual or a company owns, I don't believe that the ordinance makes any distinction there.
And this whole ordinance, Andrew, it seemed to change a little bit from the beginning of the council meeting to when it was approved later that night. What changed there? I mean, there was one concept that I heard from people in support. They wanted a guarantee from renters that if a landlord evicts somebody for like repairs or improvements, that those tenants would have to be offered a chance to move back in again at the same rent. Do we know if that made it in?
Yeah, I couldn't recite for you all of the last-minute amendments that made it into the ordinance at the very end. It did go until 9:30 p.m., and there was one of the complaints that we heard from council members was that this ordinance didn't go through the typical committee process at the city council. So typically, ordinances introduced by a council member or by the mayor will first go to a city council committee. They'll take a vote on it, either recommend a yes vote or forward it to the full city council with no recommendation. But in this case, the council president direct docketed it, which means that he brought it directly to the full city council without having had a hearing at the committee level. So I think was one of the reasons why we saw so many of these last minute amendments. When council members are legislating from the dais, writing these rules kind of on the fly, they'll have to take a periodic stop and make sure that, the city attorney will want to take a look at the language of a motion and draft up some quick language to make sure that reflects the intent of what the council members are trying to get in there. I recall, some of those last minute amendments had to do with different types of renovations that may not require a building permit, and there was this requirement that the landlord have the building permit in hand before they notify the tenant of the eviction. So, it was mostly, I would say it was for the most part, these smaller details or things that perhaps the council president hadn't considered at the very beginning, and other council members brought forward these relatively minor changes that they wanted to see. But yeah, as far as that, the right to return, where if the landlord, puts the rental unit back on the market, or if they renovate it, they would have to offer it back up to the tenant. I don't believe that made it into the final ordinance, but I hope you won't quote me on that.
San Diego is once again looking to invest in hotel property. Gary, you wrote about the Housing Commission's efforts to buy 3 hotels around Mission Valley. But the city isn't getting into the overnight travel business here, right? I mean, what's the idea behind these hotels?
These hotels would be extended stay hotels, not just like a Motel 6. So every motel room would have a kitchenette. The idea is that this is a way of creating affordable housing. Though people who are now homeless could move into these buildings, and this would be their home forever. They would not ever be back on the street. There might be some supportive services to make sure that all the issues that might have been related to their homelessness are addressed. But yeah, it is not for travelers anymore. And it's not a shelter. What they're looking at is building homes, and they looked at 3 extended stay hotels, and altogether they would have 412 rooms, and altogether it would cost $158 million. So that's the concept that they're going after. This purchase is contingent on getting money from the state. So Governor Newsom had created a Project Home Key during the pandemic, and it was a way of addressing the number of people who are on the street. At first, he had something called Project Room Key, which was to pay for hotel rooms to keep people off the street temporarily. But the state has invested billions of dollars in getting people off the street and into permanent housing. So this round of funding is $736 million, and San Diego County itself has $34 million earmarked just for municipalities in the county to apply for. And on top of that, they can also apply for the share of the entire state of funding, which again is $736 million. So that's what they're trying to do, is actually create more housing. The other thing that they're doing is working with nonprofit developers, and they're building a lot of housing. But this is seen as a way of not only doing it in a more affordable way, but in a much faster way, because these developments can take years of planning and years of construction. And if this goes smoothly, then escrow will close in October, and 412 rooms will be open for permanent housing, which is larger itself than any one single project that I believe that they have created for affordable housing.
It sounds like a pretty big deal. I mean, I think you said permanent housing there, but do we have any idea how long someone who's experiencing homelessness or maybe at risk from homelessness could stay there for? Is it indefinitely? And then is that the city's like paying for that housing?
Yeah, it'd be indefinitely, but it's not like they're paying them to live there rent free. It would be like a tiered program, and just like at Father Joe's St. Teresa Villa, there are people who may not pay anything. There's people who pay a few $100s. There probably would be vouchers attached to this, as well as people who have some kind of income, maybe SSI, or maybe they're even working but they can't afford a place to rent on their own. So tenants would live there, and some would be paying some rent, but it would be affordable housing for them. And yeah, that's how it would work. There would be this many 100 rooms by the end of the year suddenly become available.
But it sounds like your reporting says that some people aren't happy about the idea of using public money to pay for something like this.
Oh, that's certainly true. If you looked at the comments on my story, though, a lot of people were saying this is far too much money that they're spending. So in my story, not that it would come for an average of $383,000 per unit. And I talked to some people who said that's some real estate experts, and he said that's far too much. Though, like a guy said that even if it were extended stay, it would be like $325,000, not $383,000. So I did some quick math and added 412 rooms with the difference of between what the Housing Commission would pay and what he says it would worth, and it came up to like $24 million above what this guy said that it should be. However, you also have to look at the Housing Commission is trying to apply for $34 million or even more. They may be competing with some other cities in the county that was going to apply for this money. And also, there's an argument that, like, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to, this is a time that a lot of money is spent on homeless services and on getting people off the street. It's often what people say is the number one priority that cities should be doing. So you can't be too critical of a body that is about to create 412 rooms for families and single people and seniors to move into permanently, to get off the street, when we have at least 8,000 homeless people on the street, and they're trying to get them in a permanent housing. So this theoretically does make a difference. And also it's not like you can just go out and find the cheapest hotel to move into. They want these units to be successful. They want people to successfully live in them and not move out, not fall back into homelessness. And there's probably not a lot of buildings that match exactly what they're looking for. So their pool right there is smaller than just trying to buy just any building and move people into it. Though they're very careful about where the location is. It should be near some kind of transit, maybe, by food sources that they could walk to, other things like a library nearby, because these people may not have vehicles of their own. So they're trying to find like an ideal area, an ideal building. And, that pool probably isn't that great, too. So, they're trying to find, buildings to buy. Well, and there's probably not a lot that match what they're looking for. Also, when you compare what it would cost to build something, like you pick a location and say, let's just build it. That's usually a lot more. Like there's something under construction right now called Jamboree, which is in San Diegans, and that would just have 65 units. It's going to open maybe in May, and that's $486,000 a room, though. And Scripps Mesa, also a new project that would have 264 units. That's $430,000 a room. Another one downtown, it's called Courthouse Commons. That's 82 rooms, and that's $498,000. So when you look at how much it costs to work with a nonprofit developer to build something where you want it, it is cheaper to buy an existing extended stay hotel, and it certainly is a lot faster to get people off the street because, like I said, within the end of the year, we could have 412 new rooms, and it takes years to get any new project built. So what do we want to do? Spend a little money and get these people off the street as soon as possible? Everyone says that that's what we should be trying to do. And other people might say, yeah, but that's too much money. But the money is available from the state for everyone to, throughout the state to try to do just this. So that's the two sides of the argument.
Send us your thoughts on affordable housing in San Diego. How do you think the city is doing on this issue? You can email us at roundtable@kpbs.org, or you can give us a call, 619-452-0228, and leave us a voice message there. Be sure to leave your name and what city you're calling from, and we may use your message on a future show. Coming up, we're taking a look at what issues our guests are going to be following heading into the summer months. You're listening to KPBS Roundtable. I'm Matt Hoffman. We're talking about San Diego's efforts surrounding housing. Joining me is KPBS's Andrew Bowen and Gary Worth from the San Diego Union Tribune. Andrew, we know that the city is also considering redeveloping two city-owned properties downtown. That's the former Central Library and an old skydiving center, which is now the city's homeless response center. Gary's reporting says that they could be turned into shelters or even affordable housing. Do we know if this is a new approach, Andrew, in terms of taking like some existing city property and saying that we want to turn it into affordable housing?
No, it's not new at all. I can recall a few years ago when former Mayor Kevin Faulconer made an announcement about a dozen city-owned properties that he planned on making available to developers of affordable housing and permanent supportive housing. So it's a strategy that the city has been going after for a while. It's something that also other government agencies are engaging with. The county has various properties across the county that they are trying to develop into affordable housing. The state has property downtown also, and several properties across the state that the governor wants to develop. The idea is that one of the biggest constraints to building more affordable housing is the availability of land. And a lot of these government properties, government buildings are pretty old. Maybe the building that's existing there, certainly in the case of the former Central Library downtown, it's been vacant for quite a while, and it's pretty run down. So when you have those underutilized properties And it is already in, I didn't mention MTS. MTS also has a lot of parking lots and other types of properties where they're trying to develop affordable housing and mixed income housing. But the idea is, that we lack the actual land where we can build affordable housing. And the state and when that land is already in public ownership, the public gets to decide what's done with it rather than leaving that decision to the market. So there is definitely a strategy at various levels of government to utilize these public properties to build more affordable housing, because it's really hard to find just places to actually to build it to begin with. The school district. I didn't mention the school district. I mean, there are so many different government agencies that are actually quite rich in terms of the land that they own, but they have not really just made this a priority to actually get their land redeveloped.
And I know that you're not a developer, but I'm just curious on this question. Like, you were talking about the land there. So, like, for instance, that old skydiving facility, it's sort of near Petco Park and the MTS headquarters, looks fairly new, but we're not talking about like converting like an existing space and putting like rooms into that skydiving center. We're talking about probably that building coming down and then some sort of high rise going up.
Yeah, well, and that building in particular has quite a bit of history. The former mayor, Kevin Faulconer, decided to purchase it. It later was uncovered by, I believe it was the Union Tribune that broke the story that there had never been an independent appraisal of the property before the purchase went through. So the city may have and very likely did overpay for that property. But former Mayor Faulconer turned that into the Housing Navigation Center, where a homeless person or a person at risk of becoming homeless can go and access various types of social services that they may need in order to get to the next step of becoming housed. Maybe they lack a social security number. Maybe they lack an identification. Maybe they're eligible for Veterans Affairs benefits, but just haven't ever been able to enroll in those. So the idea was, let's make it a one-stop shop where somebody can go and access those services that are available to them. The criticism has been that, you can't just create, if this is public land now, public property, services are certainly one thing, but what we really need is more shelters and more housing. So if the mayor is attempting to repurpose that property into permanent housing, that the goal is certainly to make sure that it's actually housing people.
And Gary, you had this story about this, the old skydiving center, or now the Housing Navigation Center, and the old city library. Do we know if there's a preference on the city's end whether to, go ahead and make these shelters or actually go the route of affordable housing? I mean, it sounds like shelters are a premium right now, but do we know if they're leaning one way or another?
Yeah, I think they're leaning toward having housing, not the old skydiving building, because there's some clauses in a federal grant that they had to purchase the building to use for homeless services. So there's some hoops that they would have to go through to declaring it as surplus property, and they wouldn't have to go through as many hoops. It tells them if they were to turn it into affordable housing rather than shelter. So I think they would be leaning more toward using that building as just tearing it down and using it as housing. It's a very unique building. Though they still have the big tunnel in the middle of it. You can't use it for housing this in a situation that it's in now. The old library, that's going to be interesting. That's at one time a beautiful brick building. Maybe they would want to save the facade, make it look like as it always did. Was that appropriate to make it a permanent building into a shelter? That's another thing to think of. That's kind of admitting that we're always going to need a shelter that big. So with that in mind, maybe they would say, well, maybe we won't always need such a big shelter, so let's make it into housing, and we need more housing. So those things in mind, I think that they may lean more toward make them into housing.
Also making headlines this week, Andrew, was the city's plans to redevelop the Civic Center area. It's been being talked about for a while, and we're talking about multiple blocks of downtown right around near City Hall. It sounds like affordable housing is a big wish on the city's parts there for the future redevelopment. What can you generally tell us about that?
Well, it's not just the city's wish; it's also a requirement of state law. The State Surplus Land Act regulates how cities and local governments can dispose of their property, and when they choose to either sell it off to a developer or lease it, maybe sign a ground lease and retain ownership. The state law says that at least 25% of the homes that are built on that site have to be deed restricted affordable homes. And the city is obviously going to aim for more, something higher than that. But when you're a developer and you're trying to turn a profit on a building, especially with in a place like downtown where it really doesn't make sense to build anything less than a high rise because of the intensity of use that surrounds all of that property. That the construction costs can be pretty high, and they're, if the city is making this land available to a developer, the developer is only going to build on it if they think that they can actually earn some money off of it. But yeah, this discussion around the civic core is really interesting, just really heating up right now. The action that the council took this week was to officially declare the property surplus property, which starts a process where they first have to offer it to 100% affordable housing developers. Maybe there's a developer out there who could purchase or lease one of these 6 blocks and could then build with their own financing rather than asking for a subsidy from the city. And the other element in all of this is that the city wants to build a new city hall. The office space for city workers downtown is abysmal. It is, there's heating and air conditioning issues. There's ventilation issues. The bathrooms sometimes break down. Elevators can stop working. I mean, it's really, truly deplorable conditions. And it is one of the things that contributes to the city's very high vacancy rate among city employees, the engineers who, inspect our public works projects, and the all types of people who keep the city as an institution and running. So the city wants to, the idea is the city is going to take 5 of these blocks, make them available for development, and hopefully make some money off of that development, and then use that money to build themselves a new city hall, perhaps let the developer who's developing the rest of the land build the city hall for them, or create some sort of financial arrangement where the actual hit to taxpayers is minimal and the city can get both housing, market rate housing, and affordable housing, and a new public asset like a new office building with new offices for the city workers, and also new city council chambers. Right now, if you want to attend a city council meeting, you have to go into the building, go up the elevator to the 12th floor, and it doesn't really feel like something that is all that open to the public, even though it is accessible. I think we heard some desire from some council members to have the council chambers more like on the ground floor and actually visible, perhaps even to people on the outside, so that you can, as a symbol of this is open government, this is transparency, and we want, to invite people in to engage with our government.
All right, guys, we've covered a lot in this show as it relates to housing, from renter protections to shelters to new affordable housing projects. A question for both of you, and Gary, we can go to you first. What are you going to be watching for in the coming weeks and months on the issue of housing? And if you can, be a little brief here.
And housing, I don't know. Though want to look for just what we have talked about, maybe the addition of these hotels, though that's going to add more housing. And also, who is this city of San Diego going to be competing with? There's going to be more cities out there that probably have, their eyes on buying a hotel. So it could get kind of competitive to get that money, though, and that could skew just what the plans are with, how much it's going to cost to get 3 hotels if there's another city that's trying to get them. And another project coming up, Father Joe's has 2 sites that they're looking at for housing. There's one vacant property at the old God's Extended Hand Ministry right downtown. Though they're going to tear that down and build some housing with that. So there is more affordable housing that is coming, and it is going to be directed at trying to get homeless people off the street.
Andrew, you have the final word.
Well, I'm definitely watching the mayor's implementation of SB 10, which is a state law that allows cities to more quickly and easily rezone properties for small apartment buildings up to 10 units. Also, the city is debating an anti-camping ordinance proposed by Councilmember Stephen Whitburn that would make it, they claim, easier for police to issue citations to people who are camping in public, which is technically not allowed. And the city is also seeking to find a site for a safe camping site where they could actually officially sanction folks who need to camp outside. So those are some things. There are lots of things happening over the next couple of months.
Well, we're going to have to end it there for this week's edition of KPBS Roundtable, and I want to thank our guests so much. KPBS's Metro reporter Andrew Bowen, the San Diego Union Tribune's Gary Worth. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. You can leave us a message at 619-452-0228. You can also email us at roundtable@kpbs.org. And keep in mind, you can listen to our show anytime as a podcast. Roundtable airs on KPBS FM at noon on Fridays and again on Sunday at 6 a.m. The show is produced by Andrew Bracken, and Rebecca Chacon is our technical director. I'm your host, Matt Hoffman. Thanks so much for being here with us.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Splatero, helping homeowners pay off debt by offering streamlined access to your home's equity with no additional monthly payments or new debt. Splatero provides a lump sum payment in exchange for a share of your home's future value. Pre-qualification is available at splatero.com.